A young girl with caramel-colored hair and green eyes sits in front of her lawn, the warm summer sun beating down on her pale skin, covered in bruises. To think this sweet young girl was being violently hit by her peers just hours before. Alice was her name. She was a kind and intelligent girl, but didn't seem to have any friends, so she often spent time alone creating her own friends. Imaginary friends, if you will. She has had so many of these friends. In fact, she had named them all numbers just to keep on track. Out of them all were one special that stood out in particular. Her name was Zero. She was the very first of Alice's imaginary friends. Created to project Alice from all of her bullies. Whenever they would tease her or physically beat her, Zero was there to take care of them. They were best friends and spent every day together, telling stories, jokes, and even make fun of Alice's neighbor who was in charge of watching her when her parents had to go out on business. Life wasn't so lonely for Alice until that day. As Alice sat on the soft grass, looking down on the street, she felt a strange sensation, an urge. Something in the back of her mind was telling her to go to the other side of the road. When the idea finally consumed her, she skipped down the small neighborhood street. Her bare feet hit the hot concrete as she carefully watching each step as she crossed. When she looked up and saw something coming towards her, a large white truck, eyes widened in horror, she stood there in shock, bracing for impact. A loud screech of rubber against concrete. The vehicle spun past her, tumbling down the large hill opposite of her home. She heard the crunching of metal and a woman's scream as it kept rolling until it hit a large tree at the base. Only a moment later, the dismantled vehicle burst into flames, smoke climbing to the side of the tree. Alice's pale eyes stared down at the tragedy as the driver's door opened and someone fell out, desperately crawling, grabbing at the forest floor. Alice's father stared up at the hill at his loving daughter covered in his own crimson blood and bright red flames. He screamed, but he couldn't move. His leg was caught between the wheel and the metal, pain flowing through his body before his screams were silenced and he stopped moving. As the red flames consumed the scene, she saw someone in the passenger seat, her loving mother, burning to death in the flames. Alice fell to her knees, warm tears flowing down her cheeks, her nose dripping down to her chin. "Mommy! Daddy!" she screamed, witnessing everything in horrific detail. Grief and sorrow filled the entire body, replaying the scene over and over in her head. Red flames and crimson blood was the last thing she knew of her parents on a summer day. After her parents' accident, her neighbor Mr. Rogers took her in out of guilt. She hated him. He was dirty, fat man who was drunk almost every minute of the day. But she hated him even more for not watching her that day because of him. She killed her parents, but there was no one else. No family, no friends. She was all alone, misery of being her only company. Many years later, the light brunette sits on her history class doodling a little cartoon people in her sketchbook. As she went on to drawing someone's hair, something violently snapped her out of concentration. A wrinkled hand over a quiz with a large zero, it covered her work. "Alice, I suggest you actually pay attention in my classroom. You do not need another zero," said Alice's wrinkly old history teacher. Alice suddenly felt her head pound. Something about what she just said bothered her, but she didn't know what it was. "Yes, Miss Chris," Alice said, not trying to make eye contact. As she sat in class pretending to know what was going on, but her head continued to ache more and more until she felt like she was going to be sick. She asked to be excused and quickly ran to the restrooms. Alice splashed cold water on her burning face, looking up in the mirror, but jumped back, heart pounding when she saw her reflection. She swore to her she saw herself blink. After a few hours later, she sits in her art class, watching her classmates work on their projects. While doing so, her hand slips as she cut her hand pretty deeply with a razor blade, red liquid spilling out onto her work, but she felt nothing. Before she knew it, the teacher was staring at her, eyes wide, and rushed her to the nurse. When she returned, she hid her face and walked back to her seat. But she froze when she sat down. Red circles completely covered her work and desk. The whole situation made her shake, and as soon as the bell rang, she ran out into the halls. Before she left campus, she was greeted by a familiar smile. "Hello, Alice, and welcome to Wonderland," the short blonde girl with brown eyes said, throwing her arms up, gesturing to the small entire street as if to be a surprise. "Can you not, Anne?" Alice, slightly annoyed. "Come on, lighten up. Anyways, you gotta do that homework?" Anne said, resting her hands behind her head, catching snowflakes with her small pink tongue. "You'll have to do your own work eventually, you know. I'm not gonna be here forever." Yes you are, 'cause I'm not gonna have you leave," Anne said, throwing her arm around Alice's shoulder as they walked down the cold winter road. As they continued to walk, joking and gossiping to each other, they finally reached Anne's home. They said their goodbyes, and then Alice reluctantly walked into the forest. She loved it. It was peaceful, the yellow sun hitting the untouched white terrain and the thin shadows of the leafless trees. The only thing that bothered her was meant that she was going back to that horrid place that would soon would call home. She opened the creaking door and slowly entered that cold house. She held her breath while walking around through the living room. "There you are, you little bitch!" yelled a gruff man as he grabbed her arm. Alice squeaked as he yanked her back, looking straight into her eyes with disgust. Alice's face turned bright red as the knot filled her throat. "What's this, huh?" he said, pulling into her kitchen, pointing at the counter covered in beer cans and microwave meals. Yellow cases. "Shit, I forgot to clean this morning," she thought to herself. "So sorry, I just had to get to She was silenced by the solid fist of Mr. Rogers across her face. "I don't need your stupid excuses. Don't let it ever happen again, or else you'll regret it, I swear," he said, throwing her to the tile floor, walking back to the living room, slumping his large body onto the dusty couch. Alice quickly stood up, throwing away the garbage and cleaning counters in a silent panic. This wasn't uncommon. Whenever she did something wrong, there was the angry drunk man to beat her. So she did as she was told and hid in her room. She held back the emotions boiling inside: sadness, confusion, and rage. Afterwards, she quickly walked up to the steps to her small bedroom. It was a dark room. The walls covered her favorite drawings, the small bed in the center and the dresser in the corner. This was her only escape, the only place that she could be free. No one came in, only her, no one else. The next day, she walked through the snow-filled woods and emerged into the road on the other end, speed walking down the sidewalk. She did not cross the road today. She just quickly walked, her favorite black hoodie covering her large black and blue gash on her face. She couldn't tell anyone. Who knows what Mr. Rogers would do? "Alice, hey, wait up," said a familiar voice from behind. "Hey, Anne," Alice replied with a monotone voice, still facing her. Anne caught up, grabbing Alice's shoulder as she caught her breath. Alice turned to her head, looking out into the forest as Anne walked beside her. "What's with that hood? Selling some drugs?" Anne giggled to herself. "No, just, cold," she said blandly. Anne smirked and ripped off the hood, her eyes widened. "Oh my God, what happened? Are you okay?" Anne closely said, inspecting the black eye. Yeah, I'm fine. I just slipped and hit it on the countertop," she said, softly giggling nervously. Anne looked at her face sternly. She knew Alice was lying. Something was up. If you say so. Just if you need somebody, just know I'm always there for you," she said, throwing her arm over her shoulder in confidence. Alice nodded and the two girls walked towards the school. Her date continued. People stared at her as she walked by, a few people asking about, and she gave them the same answer. It was an accident. This was uncommon for her. Usually people ignored her, not giving her any glance, but she didn't like all the attention she was getting, so she wore her hood for most of the day. After school, she quickly walked out of the building, not waiting for her only friend. She walked across campus, tripping on the steps of the short stairs. When she saw two figures walk towards her, she looked at the ground, watching the concrete move under her feet. As she walked, a foot blocked her steps, tripping Alice onto the hard concrete floor. Her hands and elbows stopped her and fall almost, but sent her to notebooks and sketchbooks flying across her. Red-faced with embarrassment, she squirmed onto her knees, grabbing her books in panic. Laughing burst everywhere around her, her face turning into a deep red. Sure, now people notice me, she thought to herself. As she grabbed the last notebook, she felt something hit the back of her head. Brown liquid jumped in every direction, chocolate milk dripping off her bangs and onto her face. She froze. Something tugged at the back of her mind. She felt her blood boil with rage until she just snapped. Dropping everything, she got back up and spun around and ran towards one of the figures that had tripped her. The tall boy's eyes opened in shock as Alice's fist hit him in the gut, reaching up to his ribcage. He fell back wheezing, coughing up blood as he sat on the concrete, hugging his stomach. Her knee rammed into the side of his head. He coughed up more crimson when Alice grabbed his leg with her foot and broke it. A loud crack echoed against the brick walls of the school. She went for his arm, and she saw the second figure run towards her. She dodged his punching, slamming her elbow onto his back, sending his body towards the concrete. The shorter boy quickly spun around, Alice sitting at top of his stomach, punching his damaged face over and over and over until you could see blood pour from his nose and mouth. He struggled to stop her, but he was too weak. He had no choice but just to take each and every blow. "Alice, stop!" she heard someone yell, running towards the scene. She looked up in hand position for another punch, but stopped when she once saw the horrified look on everyone's faces, including Anne's. She snapped out of whatever terrible phase that had just entered and looked down at her bloody knuckles and mangled face of the body of the boy. "What did I do? This isn't me. I didn't do this. At least I didn't mean to," she thought, tears filling her eyes. She quickly stood, backing away from the two mangled victims, and ran off school grounds towards the forest. She ran to her bathroom, rummaging through the cabinet, searching for medicine to clean the wounds she had caused herself. She poured the alcohol onto the cuts and used to wash off the blood. She watched as small white bubbles foam inside of the cut on her hands and elbow. Once she bandaged her wounds, she rested her hands on the counter and stared at herself in the bathroom. What did I just do? Did I snap? Had I done this before? She whispered to herself, questions swimming around in her head. Oh no, of course not. I just had to protect you, her mouth answered, using her own voice. Alice jumped back, eyes widened, her pale face, her reflection just spoke to her. What? Who are you? She asked, shaking. After a long pause, the raspy voice finally spoke once more. I am your best friend. Don't you remember? She set her lips. Tears ran down her warm cheeks. Her head began to pound as she fell to the ground, grasping her head, screaming. The voice was inside her head, screaming the same phrase over and over again. Don't you remember me, Alice? I'm your best friend. Your only friend. The next few weeks, the voice did not return, but Alice did not return to the girl she once was. She became violent, angry at almost everything. She had violent fits of laughter out of nowhere, and often fought or stole from others. It was strange. She felt as if her mind was replaced with someone else's. And of course, after being expelled, she had no choice but to stay in her room, not eating, not talking, completely void of interaction. This continued for many months until her migraines became worse. Her head pounded against her skull until she screamed and cried, begging for it to stop. She couldn't go to a doctor or a therapist. They would surely call her insane and put her in an asylum. She couldn't let that happen. Then one day, after a particular violent drunk outburst from Mr. Rogers that left her with cuts all over her arms, as she sobbed and her mind pounded against its chamber, she began to feel weaker and weaker until her vision went black. When she woke, she found herself laying on the floor of her bedroom. Her muscles ached as if they were torn apart, only to be slowly sewn together. She got up, headache gone, but extremely tired and hungry. She walked downstairs, stumbling towards the kitchen, violently opening the fridge door. Nothing. It was almost completely bare. Sighing, she pulled on her hoodie and slipping on her black Converse and walked out the door. Walking out of the closest grocery store, she walked past the television store with a particular news report that caught her interest in one of the televisions. Breaking news. Man found violently beaten to death without a blunt instrument. More at 11, said the brunette newswoman. Alice continued to walk home, the cold autumn wind flowing past her, grocery bags slumped at her sides. When she entered the home, there was no sign of Mr. Rogers. Relieved, she threw her bags on the counter of the kitchen, grabbing a can of soup to make for dinner. She turned on the television, flipping through the channel of the news station from earlier. The same brunette woman sitting holding papers in her manicured hands. Man killed at 6:15 p.m. today, found in alleyway of Richard Street. He was a Caucasian male around his mid-40s. Several of her limbs he had head of the corpse was missing. To identify identity is unrecognizable, the woman continued with the significant details. After finishing her soup, she walked up the stairs. She stopped when she smelled something putrid. She continued to walk up the stairs until she froze. A sledgehammer lay in the hallway covered in blood. In a panic, she ran to her bedroom and slammed the door. She breathed heavily, her heart pounding against her ears until she let out a blood-curdling scream. Her room was completely covered in circles written in blood, from the walls to the ceiling, and atop her bed lay the caved-in skull attached to the head of Mr. Rogers. She ran out of the room, but tripping over the handle of the blunt instrument, she fell down the flight of stairs. When she reached the bathroom, her head slammed against the cold, solid cabinet, knocking her out cold. When she woke up in a dark room, when she stood up, she noticed that the room was filled with hundreds of mirrors. Her reflections was projected in every part of her view. Everywhere she looked, she saw her sickly face and exhausted eyes. Her heart began to pound. Where was she? Aren't you happy? He's gone. He won't hurt you anymore, said the same voice from months before. Alice spun around, looking for wherever the voice was located, but she could only see her own pathetic reflection. Who are you? I want answers! She screamed at the top of her lungs. Cracked laughter filled the dark room. Don't you remember me, Alice? I'm your best friend. Your very first friend. I am Zero. A long silence filled the room. You imagined me so I could protect you, but if I am imagined, I cannot help. So I had to find a way so I could always protect you. I am simply part of your consciousness. So, in fact, I am you, the voice whispered. No, you're not. You couldn't be, unless you're a demon? Alice asked shakily. No, of course not. I am a friend, here to do what I was told to do, all those years ago. But you ignored me after your parents' death. I was very lonely, Alice. But I'm getting stronger. You can't control me anymore, Alice, said the sinister voice. My parents. Wait, I remember. Alice thought to herself. You told me to go onto the road, and you made me kill my parents. Tears flowed down her burning cheeks. Why, yes, I had to. They wouldn't let us play, so I couldn't protect you, because they did. So they needed to go, so I could do my job. That is what you ordered me to do, after all, to protect you. Alice's cries stopped. She stood there in silence, her entire body filled with uncontrollable rage. Without warning, she ran her fist to the mirrors, each and every one. You took everything away from me. Everyone is gone. I have no one. I am nothing, she screamed, as she continued to punch the reflective surfaces until her knuckles bleed. As she ran to the next mirror, she tripped over something. When she looked back, she saw the crimson-glazed sledgehammer. Picking it up, violently smashing into everything. Glass flew around the room, hitting Alice in several places, cutting her deeply, but she couldn't feel anything anymore. She was completely void of anything at this point. She stopped her fit of rage, violently catching her breath, standing on the glass-filled room floor, splattered with her own blood dripping from her hands. She glances around the room until she saw her reflection in the corner of the room. It was smiling. She ran towards it with her blunt instrument, smashing herself through the mirror. Her eyes opened slowly, blinding white light entering her eyes, the cold tile floor pressing against her aching back. She slowly sat up, seeing that she was in her bedroom. She grabbed the countertop to help her up. When she finally got to her feet, she looked at herself in the large mirror. After many minutes of complete silence, she finally burst out into a fit of violent laughter. A giant smile stretched across her face. Both her skin and hair had been completely bleached white, and large black circles surrounded her eyes, reaching from her eyebrows to her cheeks. "Aha! Now this is more like it. I finally feel like myself," she said. "Please leave me alone," said the lips of those previously Alice's. "I have for so much too long," Zero responded. Alice did not respond. She was gone. "Ha! I kinda look like a skeleton, but not quite," she said, admiring her white complexion. She left the bathroom, walking down to the living room, grabbing some scissors and needle and thread. When she entered the bathroom again, she set down her own supplies and smiled in the mirror. "A skeleton needs her teeth," she said as she ran the sharp scissors to her cheeks, blood gushing out from her chin. The blades pinched the muscle and nerves and flesh on each side of her face. The crimson liquid continued to pour. After large cuts were finished and reached her face from ear to ear, she grabbed the needle and thread and began to sew her face in vertical pattern as to look like lines across, only her mouth being free from its grasp. Red liquid began to pour down from the open wounds. She frowned at the sight of it as she tilted her head. "Ugh, red, I hate that color. Remember, Alice, the blood pouring from your father's scalp? The red flames that consumed your mother? These colors were the last I remembered before you locked me away. That's not to be reminded." She looked as she bent down to the tile floor and dripped her index finger into bleach. She stood and bent her head back, lifting the finger above her eye, dropping the liquid into each eye. They began to sting and then burn as if they were on fire, and she couldn't see anything for a few moments. When her vision finally returned, the once crimson liquid returned to a deep black blood. As she looked, everything she saw was either a deep black, blinding white, or faded gray. She didn't have to see the horrible color again. Finished with her work, she walked out into the hall when she heard the phone, walking into Alice's bedroom. She answered it. "Hello?" she said in a sly tone. "Alice! Oh my God! Are you all right? I haven't seen you in months. I've been trying to get a hold of you forever." Anne spoke in a panic. "I'm fine. Great, actually," Zero giggled. "Good. Could you come over? I've got something for you," she said excitedly. "Yeah, I'll be right over." Zero responded, quickly hanging up afterwards. Her smile whitened, stretching the skin held by the thread. She quickly walked out of the room, picking up her hammer and running out of the house and into the autumn woods. She emerged from the other side, walking up the empty street. The soiled tool dragged behind her, grinding against the concrete. She giggled to herself as she approached the house. The light in the kitchen remained on, even though the car was gone. Anne's shadow ran across the small lit window. Zero, growing impatient, walked up the steps and slowly knocked on the oak door. "I'll be right there, Alice. Man, you're gonna love your gift," Anne yelled from another room. When she opened the door, her grin quickly faded. Once here her friend instead stood a white monster. Silence filled the room for several moments before Anne ran towards the living room. Zero grabbed for her forearm before she could get away and threw her against the hard floor. "Alice, what are you doing?" Anne screamed. Zero quickly walked towards her, placing her foot on her arm, splitting it in half. Her screams filled the entire house, rattling against the walls. "Ha! Alice is gone, and she won't be coming back. As for why? Well, you can't have Zero with one left," she laughed as she lifted the large hammer above her head. With all of Zero's strength, the hammer entered Anne's skull, spraying black liquid all over the walls and floor without hesitation. She yanked out her weapon and shook off the pieces of brain matter hanging off. Anne's still corpse lay, the soft innards completely exposed. With a smirk, she had left and returned with a large cleaver. Let's see what we can do with this," she said, as she turned Anne's lifeless body around so her stomach touched the floor. She picked up a knife and ran the line across both Anne's legs, arms, and back. She slowly tore open the cuts and muscles and tendons, splitting and snapping as more black liquid poured out. She repeated this and the rest, and then dug her hands into her back, Gripping the rib cage, she pulled and finally yanked out both the spine and the rib cage. Laughing, she then placed it next to Anne's body, and then she placed it the arms, and then the legs. They were all in the right order. Anne's skeleton laying beside her flesh. It's the only thing missing was the skull. Your skull is too damaged, and it would be too much of a bother to take all this skin. So, I know. Zero dipped her hand in the pool of black blood and drew a 0 in the place of the head of the skeleton. Perfect, now you're just like me, a lonely skeleton. Oh, what's this? Something besides the body caught her attention. A box with a white ribbon on top, reading the tag reading to Alice. She ripped off the lid and saw a simple black and white scarf inside. Why, thank you, Anne. You know I hate color, she said as she swung the cloth around her neck. Red and blue lights began to fill the dark room throughout the front window. Well, was fun, Anne, and now with you gone, we finally have 0, said the white-faced killer as she raced out the door and into the dark woods. What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, please stay pretty.